This video is an explanation of the reading comp passage about bimetallism. This could be watched in conjunction with any question about the passage. Each question itself is explained in its own video explanation. Now, I will say if you're doing multiple questions about this passage, I would urge you to do all the questions first before you watch this particular video. That way you'll be answering the question with your own understanding of the passage. Here's the passage. Paragraph 1. The U.S. Constitution established both gold and silver as the basis for U.S. currency. That is to say, it established a bimetallic standard for currency. This remained in place for about a century until the Coinage Act of 1873, which embraced a gold-only standard, a monometallic standard, effectively dropping silver as the basis of currency. Over the next several decades, advocates of bimetallism and the advocates of the gold-only standard fiercely debated. And so this is about the question, what should be the basis of the currency? And the gold-only people are saying that gold, and just gold, should be the basis of the currency. The bimetalist people are saying both gold and silver should be the basis of the currency. And so this apparently was an issue in the second half of the 19th century in America. The gold-only advocates, such as William McKinley, argued that shifts in the relative value of the two precious metals could lead to wild fluctuations of the value of currency in the bimetallic system. Earlier in the United States history, Alexander Hamilton had tried to fix the gold-silver exchange rate by fiat, but of course such restraints only inhibit the natural development of a free market. So that's interesting. The value of gold and silver fluctuate according to the laws of the free market. And so, of course, you can't establish a fixed ratio. This much gold is always going to be worth this much silver, because they're both just fluctuating according to supply and demand, following their own patterns. And so trying to fix that would mess with the operation of the free market, would mess with the market itself. And that would be problematic for the economy. You want to let the free market run unimpeded. And so this is a problem. And of course, if they're fluctuating, as McKinley points out, if the gold and the silver are fluctuating independently and you're trying to base currency on it, well, then the currency is going to be fluctuating wildly. And, people are going to try and make a profit because the gold is worth more than the silver at one time, or the silver is worth more relative to the gold. And so it creates a number of problems that are just eliminated by a gold-only standard. Unemployment was high in the depression caused by the Panic of 1893, and many argued that these economic challenges had been triggered by abandoning bimetallism. One of the more prominent advocates of bimetallism was William Jennings Bryan. Indeed, bimetallism was the very center of his presidential campaign in 1896 and 1900, both of which he lost to McKinley. Bryant argued the popular view that the gold-only standard limited the money supply and thus favored those who were already quite wealthy against the interests of working people of all professions. He famously expressed this argument in his Cross of Gold speech at the 1896 Democratic National Convention, in which he argued that continuing the gold-only standard would, quote-unquote, crucify the honest laboring classes on a cross of gold. So, a famous, eloquent, rhetorical device in American history. But what's going on here is that essentially Bryant is saying he thinks that gold is limited. And because gold is limited, that means the money supply is limited. And because the money supply is limited, only a small number of people are rich and everyone else is poor. And so, as we'll see in a moment, this is a flawed economic view. But this was the assumption at the time, that because gold is limited, it necessarily means that people are poor. And therefore, all these working people, these poor working people who are not enjoying prosperity, they're being, quote-unquote, crucified on a cross of gold. Because the rich people have decided that the currency is going to be on a gold-only standard, there's not enough money left over for everyone else. So that was the basic argument at the time. Despite the eloquence of Bryant's arguments, history has strongly favored the gold-only standard. The argument that increasing the money supply would lead to greater prosperity now strikes us as naive. Of course, we now understand that increasing the monetary supply can lead to runaway inflation, which hurts everyone. So really, really interesting. What was part and parcel of their argument, they thought that increasing the money supply would lead to prosperity to everyone. Well, that's just, we understand now in terms of economics, that's not the case. In other words, if the U.S. government just started to print a bunch more money, that would lead to inflation, and that would not produce prosperity. In fact, inflation produces all kinds of problems. Furthermore, gold did not remain limited as the advocates of bimetallism imagined. So that was part and parcel of their argument also. They thought gold was really limited. In the 1890s, scientists discovered a cyanide process that allowed workers to extract pure gold from a much lower grade ore, thus significantly increasing domestic gold production. Additionally, the discovery of 2 immense gold deposits in South Africa substantially increased world gold supply. So in other words, we thought gold was really limited, and then developments in technology and this big discovery in South Africa, suddenly turns out gold was not nearly as limited as we thought. And so that was another blow to the assumptions of the bimetalist argument. So notice the bimetalist argument was making 2, what we could say, flawed assumptions. Flawed assumption number 1, gold is limited. That turned out not to be true. And flawed assumption number 2, increasing the monetary supply will bring prosperity to everyone. And now we understand economics much better, and we know that that's not the case. So the final sentence, thus the gold-only standard allowed for ample currency and even the robust prosperity in the 1920s, so bimetallism died a quiet death. And so once people were enjoying prosperity with the gold-only standard, the bimetalist argument just became forgotten. And so that's how it's funny that this thing that was so controversial 50 years later, it just disappeared.